My name is Rick Lyon, and I'm originally from Crawfordsville, Indiana, in the United States. I grew up on our family farm, worked most of my life in the environmental department of a steel mill, retiring in 2018. I made my living from the steel mill, but my real business, my passion and purpose, has been serving God and man through the fifth epical revelation of God to mankind. I have many friends around the world thanks to my organizational and spiritual opportunities. I don't recall a time when I did not know God or feel His presence. I have never had that revelation moment when God suddenly became real. I just always knew. I've had many experiences in my life that validate that knowledge. One of the most profound and life-changing experiences of my life was when I discovered the Urantia book. This book is not a religion or trying to replace any religion. In my opinion, it is meant to uplift all religions. It is a revelation of the immensity of God's creations in both the material and the spiritual realms. It is the handbook on how to live, benefit, and prosper from a spiritual life. It reveals that science and religion are not competitors, but the two aspects of all creation. Religion is the study of God. Science is the study of God's creations. Both are equally important and directly related to each other. The Urantia book is a personal spiritual philosophy rather than a religion. If you ever ask, why am I here? What is the meaning of life? What is my purpose? Then this is the book for you. I had tested several religions, read their religious writings, but never did their portrayal of God match what I felt inside. But when I opened the Urantia book and read it for the first time, I shook it at my wife and said, "This is what I've been trying to tell you." That was in 1978. Today, my wife for the past 5 years, Susan, is just as passionate about God and the Urantia book as I am. We own an online business called CosmicCreations.biz. I have put together a few books. One is a 4-book series called Facts with the Facts, or Frequently Asked Questions with the Facts or Answers. Another is A New Revelation of Jesus. And my latest is The God of Jesus, a personal introduction to the real God of love. I have taught several online courses, given presentations, created YouTube videos, helped organize large and small Urantia events, and others. I served as executive director of Urantia Association for several years. Probably the most astonishing and revolutionary feature of Jesus' ministry was his attitude toward women. At a time when a man was not supposed to greet a woman in public, even his own wife, Jesus dared to teach women publicly and personally. But more than just teaching women, Jesus was also training women to become preachers and teachers of the good news and the gospel right alongside men. It is clear that Jesus did not restrict a woman's right to teach publicly. He encouraged it and empowered them to teach, preach, and lead as they were led to do. We know this based on the faithfulness of the women who followed Jesus, the numerous accounts of effective women preachers and teachers in the Bible and the Urantia book, and the noble example of the divine attitude towards women contained in the religion of Jesus. And let me point out here that there is a religion about Jesus, and there is a religion of Jesus. Jesus even dared to take women along as teachers of the gospel in connection with his third preaching tour of Galilee. In one generation, Jesus lifted women out of the disrespectful oblivion and slavish drudgery of the ages. Of all the daring things that Jesus ever did, the most amazing was his sudden announcement to the apostles on Sunday evening, January 16th, AD 29, that on the morrow we will set apart 10 women for the ministering work of the kingdom. Jesus asked David Zebedee to send messengers to Bethsaida to contact 10 devout women who had served in the administration of the former hospital set up when the Master was teaching there. These women had all listened to the instructions given to the young evangelist, but it had never occurred to them or their teachers that Jesus would dare to commission women to teach the gospel of the kingdom and minister to the sick. These 10 women selected and commissioned by Jesus were Susanna, the daughter of the former Chazen of the Nazareth synagogue, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the steward of Herod Antipas, Elizabeth, the daughter of a wealthy Jew of Tiberias and Sepphoris, Martha, the elder sister of the apostles Andrew and Peter, Rachel, the sister-in-law of Jude, the Master's brother in the flesh, Masanta, the daughter of Elman, the Syrian physician, Milcah, a cousin of the apostle Thomas, Ruth, the eldest daughter of Matthew Levi, Celta, the daughter of a Roman centurion, and Agamon, the widow of Damascus. Later, Jesus added 2 other women to this group, Mary Magdalene and Rebecca, the daughter of Joseph of Arimathea. Jesus authorized these women to set up their own organization and directed Judas Iscariot, the apostles' treasurer, to provide funds for their equipment and pack animals. The women elected Susanna as their chief and Joanna as their treasurer. From this time on, they furnished their own funds, and never again did they draw upon Judas for support. It was most astonishing in that day, when women were not even allowed on the main floor of the synagogue, being confined to the women's gallery, to see them serving as authorized teachers of the new gospel. The mission that Jesus gave these 10 women, as he set them apart for gospel teaching and ministry, was the Emancipation Proclamation, which set free all women and for all time. No longer were men to look upon women as their spiritual inferior. And even though many times the apostles had heard the Master say that in the kingdom of heaven there is neither rich nor poor, free nor bond, male nor female, all are equally the sons and daughters of God, they were literally stunned when he proposed formally to commission these women as religious teachers and even to permit their traveling about with them. The whole country was stirred up by this proceeding. The enemies of Jesus made great capital out of this move. But everywhere, the women believers stood staunchly behind their sisters and voiced no uncertain approval of this acknowledgement of women's place in religious work. Increasingly, women had become believers in the gospel of the kingdom, and this situation had been a source of much difficulty and embarrassment when they desired to have personal conversations with Jesus or one of the apostles. But now, all that was changed. As a result of the ministry of these 10 women, Mary Magdalene was won for the kingdom. Martha and Rachel made it plain to Mary that the doors of the kingdom are open to even people like her. Mary believed the good news and was baptized by Peter the next day. Mary Magdalene joined the women's corps and became the most effective teacher of the gospel among this group of women evangelists. Mary became their chief teacher and public speaker. Soon afterward, on January 22nd, AD 29, at Tiberias, upon the instruction of Jesus, Andrew put the Sabbath services in the charge of the women. The women selected Joanna to lead this occasion, and the meeting was held in the banquet room of Herod's new palace. Joanna read from the scriptures concerning women's work in the religious life of Israel, making reference to Miriam, Deborah, Esther, and others. These women, and many others, went on through the remainder of Jesus' life on earth, laboring faithfully and effectively for the enlightenment and uplifting of their downtrodden sisters. And when the last and tragic episode in the drama of Jesus' life was being enacted, when the apostles, all but one, had fled, these women were all present, and not one either denied or betrayed him. Welcome to this presentation on the spiritual equality of women. In creating this presentation, I used several religious, spiritual, and philosophical sources, primarily the Christian Bible, the Christ Experiment, and the Urantia book. These three unique sources contain valuable information and include information from other sources that they in turn refer to. Most of the pictures you see are from artforgod.com and truthbook.com. The topic of equality can encompass physical, economic, social, or other forms of equality. It can relate to genders, races, cultures, and all aspects of mortal life. All of us can understand and relate to the experience of inequality because all of us are in some way frequently treated unfairly or discriminated against for various reasons. These forms of inequality have their own sets of causes and solutions, but I believe if we can solve the issue of spiritual equality, we will effect change in all these other forms of inequality. And this is why I chose this difficult topic for my presentation. Some modern religions acknowledge the spiritual equality of women, but deny them equality in service and leadership. The maturity of any culture or religion is demonstrated by how they view and treat women. The more advanced a culture is, the more spiritually free and equal women are in that culture. The status of women in a culture, group, or religion in turn reveals the level of maturity for that culture, group, or religion itself. The Christ Experiment says, "We believe if more men and women understood and accepted their sonship with God, religious manipulation, oppression, and abuse would come to an end. Sectarian religious wars would cease, and mankind would be on its way to the longed-for peace and goodwill for all men. Sonship with God is the power position and the foundation stone for the next religious frontier." So before we go further, let me address my terminology. You will hear me refer to man, and by that I mean the human race or mankind, meaning both men and women, as human beings and mortals. I use the word son as in a son of God, because the common designation for the second person of the Trinity is the eternal Son. The first step in realizing spiritual equality is to recognize the individual's sonship with God. What we mean by that is the recognition of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of mankind. That all men and women are children of the same Heavenly Father who created all things, including us. If you cannot know yourself and others as a child of God, then the idea of equality is meaningless. If you cannot acknowledge the value of others, all others, to God, then they will have no value to you. And Jesus loved all men and women because he valued them so much. So now let me address the use of the term such as Son of God and Brotherhood of Man. Let me explain why I think this terminology is appropriate, or at least not offensive, when considering both men and women. It isn't appropriate or respectful to refer to anyone with personality, be they men or angels, as an it or a that. The source and center of all creation is God the Father. There is none above him and nothing before him. In the beginning was the Trinity, God the Father, the Eternal Son, and the Infinite Spirit, represented here by 3 blue concentric circles. We material beings tend to visualize the creation of the Trinity as a sequence of events, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. But the truth is, all 3 are eternal. There never was, and I do mean never, a time when either of these 3 did not exist. So let me be clear before that objection is raised, that the Son did not come before the Spirit. They are both co-eternal, meaning no beginning and no end. And you will see why I make that distinction here in a moment. Think of the eternal Son as the Son of God and the infinite Spirit as the daughter of God. I want you to realize and understand that the spiritual equality of women is eternal, from the beginning of eternity, as if eternity had a beginning. It existed in the eternal past, exists in the present, and will exist into the eternal future. In the mind of God, the eternal Son and the infinite Spirit are co-eternal with Him and equal in status and standing before God. The spiritual equality of women existed long before mortal women existed. From the Son came Jesus, the Son of God, and after his life on earth, the Son of Man. And from the Spirit came the divine minister, also called the Mother Spirit in some faiths. We know that while the son and the daughter differ in abilities, they are wholly cooperative and perfectly complemental to each other. Notice that together they are both eternal and infinite, as is God the Father. The Son functions as a father. The Spirit functions as a mother, always working in partnership with the Son and being everlastingly indispensable to the administration of the universe. Together they are the ultimate pattern for the family, and their relationship with each other is indeed the high ideal for all human families. From the Son of God comes the sons of God, and from the Mother Spirit comes the daughters of God. Those beings of direct descent from the eternal Son are called the sons of God, while the children of the Spirit are called the daughters of God. We know the sons of God as mortals, frequently using male pronouns when referring to all God's mortal children or sons of God. The daughters of God are called angels and are commonly referred to by feminine pronouns. Angels are very affectionate and sympathetic beings. The angels faithfully and valiantly struggle for the welfare of mortals and the glory of their divine parents. Mortal sons of God are then classified as male and female. Notice that both mortal males and females share the exact same spiritual origins and endowments. Angels are classified as cherubim and seraphim. They are our spiritual cousins. So as you can see, all mortals are sons of God, but there are male sons of God and female sons of God, just as cherubim and seraphim are both daughters of God. Since all mortals, male and female, are sons of God, and all angels are daughters of God, then it seems to me from the higher cosmic perspective that referring to angels as a group by female pronouns and mortals as a group by male pronouns, such as sons of God or the brotherhood of man, is acceptable. So why have I gone to such lengths to reach this conclusion? Because I want you to see that when we refer to men and women as sons of God in the brotherhood of man, none of us should take offense by that designation, but rather rejoice to know that we are all sons of God, and the angels watching over us are all the daughters of God. So let's get back to our mission here today, which is to prove to you that women absolutely are spiritually equal to men in the eyes of God and according to Jesus, and should be in the eyes of both women and men. In Jesus' day and before, a woman had no rights in the home, the city, or the empire. People at that time looked down upon women, considering them suitable only to raise children and manage the home. She was man's property. Though Jesus introduced a superior attitude toward women, it would take time for this superior attitude to be fully realized. Even today, over 2,000 years later, mankind continues to struggle with the equality of women. When investigating the spiritual equality of women, we should look primarily to Jesus as the final authority in all matters of spirituality. Jesus is the Word of God made flesh. He is the greatest tangible example we have of who God is, what God is, and how God thinks. Having come from the personal presence of God himself, Jesus knows whereof he speaks. To follow Jesus means to personally share his religious faith and to enter into the spirit of the Master's life of unselfish service for man. One of the most important things in human living is to find out what Jesus believed, to discover his ideals, and to strive for the achievement of his exalted life purpose. Of all human knowledge, that which is of greatest value is to know the religious life of Jesus and how he lived it. Jesus absolutely lived and taught the spiritual equality of women, even in the face of man-made traditions and religious dogma demanding otherwise. Men and women who choose to follow Jesus must acknowledge this spiritual equality of women. Jesus views women as equal to men, as equal in standing before God, and he even ordained them and encouraged women to teach and preach in their own right. Even more so, to take on leadership roles within whatever religious or spiritual group they belong to, from their own families up to traditional organized religions, and further to the new revelations of truth being revealed to the people of this world today. When women do this, they generate respect, discover equality, and create more and more opportunities for other women to serve. The women of today are truly the giants upon whose shoulders future generations of women will stand. The Urantia book says, "Woman has always been the moral standard bearer and the spiritual leader of mankind. The hand that rocks the cradle still fraternizes with destiny." It also says, "No being, and let me add, no government or religion, in all the universe has the rightful liberty to deprive any other being of true liberty, the right to love and be loved, the privilege of worshiping God and serving his fellows." God created men and women to work together in equal partnership as demonstrated by Adam and Eve. Together they complemented each other's talents and skills, and such a partnership brings the best of both worlds to the situation at hand. When men and women work together equally, we all benefit from the wonderful diversity that being both male and female brings to mankind. Be yourself and do what you do best, whether that is a corporate business owner providing goods, services, and jobs to others, or a stay-at-home mom raising tomorrow's teachers and leaders. We surely need both, and all those in between. The Urantia book also tells us to live loyally today, grow, and tomorrow will attend to itself. The quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is to live loyally each moment as a tadpole. Jesus taught us to love and value each other, but also to love and value ourselves and who we are as individuals. God doesn't just love mankind, he loves you personally, woman or man, and loves you individually. So let's consider what Jesus said about equality. Jesus said, and I quote, "Though human beings differ in many ways, the one from another, before God and in the spiritual world all mortals stand on equal footing. There are only two groups of mortals in the eyes of God, those who desire to do his will, and those who do not." And further, mankind can appropriately be divided into many classes in accordance with differing qualifications, as they may be viewed physically, mentally, socially, vocationally, or morally. But as the different classes of mortals appear before the judgment bar of God, they stand on equal footing. This is the meaning of the phrase that God is truly no respecter of persons. All are equal in the eyes of God. And although you cannot escape the recognition of the differences in human abilities and endowments, you should make no such distinctions in the spiritual brotherhood of mankind when assembled for worship in the presence of God." Unquote. So let us now look at some examples of what Jesus said, but more importantly, what he did concerning the spiritual equality of women. Let's look at how Jesus treated women, because he who has seen how Jesus values women has seen how the Heavenly Father values women. When Jesus was 12 years old, the status of women was such that when Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem for his first Passover, the men and women could not travel together, the men going in one group and the women in another. This arrangement was what led to the boy Jesus accidentally being left behind when the group returned home. This led to him participating in the temple discussions while awaiting his parents' return. Women seldom went to the Passover feast. They were not required to be present. Jesus, however, refused to go unless his mother would accompany them. And when his mother decided to go, many other Nazareth women, the largest number of women ever to go up to the Passover, were led to make the journey too. It was a great shock to the boy Jesus when his mother took leave of them to go to the women's gallery. It had never occurred to Jesus that his mother would not be able to accompany him to the consecration ceremonies. He was thoroughly indignant that she was made to suffer from such an unjust discrimination. While he strongly resented this, he said nothing. Remember, at this point he's 12 years old. But he thought and thought deeply about this situation. One of the many embarrassing questions he asked of the temple scribes and teachers a week later was, why should the mothers in Israel be segregated from the male temple worshippers? Oh, how I wish we knew their answer to that one. What was Jesus' attitude about girls getting an education? On Tuesday, September 25th, 88, Jesus' father Joseph was killed in an accident. Jesus, at the age of 14, became the father figure for his widowed mother and his 8 brothers and sisters. At that time, 2,000 years ago, the girls of Jewish families ordinarily received little education. But Jesus maintained, and his mother agreed, that girls should go to school the same as boys. And since the synagogue school would not receive them, there was nothing to do but conduct a homeschool specifically for them. Jesus taught that wise parents carefully plan for the education and training of both their sons and daughters. In this way, they are prepared for the greater responsibilities of later life. In another episode of Jesus' young adult life, he observed the man mistreating his wife. Jesus stepped up behind the irate husband and, tapping him gently on the shoulder, said, "My friend, may I speak with you in private for a moment?" The angry man was confused by such an approach, and after a moment of embarrassing hesitation stammered out, "Why, yes, what do you want with me?" When Jesus had led him to one side, he said, "My friend, I perceive that something terrible must have happened to you. I very much desire that you tell me what could happen to such a strong man to lead him to attack his wife, the mother of his children. What did the woman do to deserve such treatment from her husband? Now, my friend, tell me, what is the matter?" It was not so much what Jesus said that touched this man's heart, as the kindly look and the sympathetic smile which Jesus bestowed upon him. Said the man, "I perceive that you are a priest, and I am thankful you restrain me. My wife has done no great wrong. She is a good woman. But she irritates me by the manner in which she picks on me in public, and I lose my temper. I'm sorry for my lack of self-control." And then, in bidding him farewell, Jesus said, "My brother, always remember that man has no rightful authority over woman, unless the woman has willingly and voluntarily given him such authority. The loving care and consideration which a man is willing to bestow upon his wife and their children are the measure of a man's level of spiritual maturity. As Jesus walked away, he looked back upon the scene of the teary-eyed couple standing in silent embrace. Several of the men who witnessed this event changed the way they treated their wives and children from that day on. Later that afternoon, Jesus taught his friends that all men are my brothers. My Father in heaven does not despise nor regret any creature of our making. The kingdom of heaven is open to all men and women. No man may close the door of mercy in the face of any hungry soul who may seek to gain an entrance thereto. We will sit at meat with all who desire to hear of the kingdom. As our Father in heaven looks down upon the people of this world, they are all alike. Refuse not to break bread with Pharisee or sinner, Sadducee or publican, Roman or Jew, rich or poor, free or bond, male or female. The door of the kingdom is wide open to all who desire to know the truth and to find God. Jesus refused to make specific pronouncements dealing with marriage and divorce, but he did most bitterly denounce the shameful floutings of the marriage relationship in that day, and pointed out their injustice to women and children. He never sanctioned any divorce practice which gave man any advantage over woman. The Master approved only those teachings which accorded women equality with men. The apostles were at first shocked by, but early became accustomed to Jesus' treatment of women. He made it very clear to them that women were to be accorded equal rights with men in the kingdom. The disciples early learned that the Master had a profound respect and sympathetic regard for every human being he met, and they were tremendously impressed by this uniform and unvarying consideration which he so consistently gave all sorts of men, women, and children. He would pause in the midst of a profound discourse, that he might go out in the road and speak good cheer to a passing woman, laden with her burden of body and soul. He would interrupt a serious conference with his apostles to fraternize with an intruding child. Nothing ever seemed so important to Jesus as the individual human who chanced to be in his immediate presence. He was master and teacher, but he was more. He was also an understanding friend and neighbor. At the end of June, AD 27, shortly after Jesus began his public ministry and while teaching and preaching in Samaria, land of the Samaritans, the Master and the 12 apostles arrived at Jacob's well near Sychar. It was almost 6 o'clock on this summer evening when Jesus, being weary from the journey, sat down by the well while the apostles went to bring food and tents from Sychar. Jesus was thirsty, but there was no way of getting water from the well. When a woman named Nalda came up with her water pitcher, Jesus said, "Give me a drink." She was much surprised to have a Jewish man thus speak to her at the well and ask for water, for it was not deemed proper in those days for a self-respecting man to speak to a woman in public, much less a Jew to converse with a Samaritan. Nalda asked Jesus, "How is it that you ask for a drink of water from me, a Samaritan woman?" And Jesus answered, "I have indeed asked you for a drink, but if you could only understand, you would ask me for a draught of the living water. Everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again, but whosoever drinks of the water of the living Spirit shall never thirst. And this living water shall become in him a well of refreshment, springing up even to eternal life." Nalda then said, "Give me this water, that I thirst not." She began saying, "I know that John the Baptist has preached about the coming of the Messiah, and that when he shall come, he will declare all things to us." And Jesus, interrupting Nalda, said with startling assurance, "I who speak to you am he." This was the first direct, positive, and undisguised pronouncement of his divine nature, which Jesus made, and he made it to a woman, a Samaritan woman of questionable character in the eyes of men, but a woman whom the divine eye saw as having been sinned against, more than as sinning of her own desire, and as now being a human soul who desired salvation, desired it sincerely and wholeheartedly, and that was enough. It was very difficult for Jesus to teach his apostles that women, even so-called immoral women, have souls which can choose God as their Father, thereby becoming candidates for life everlasting. Now let's look at some of the women spiritual leaders and followers of Jesus. Earlier, I told you about how Jesus created the women's corps and trained and authorized them to teach and preach the gospel, to minister to the sick, faithfully and effectively uplifting their downtrodden sisters, and even conduct Sabbath services. This women's corps also went out 2 and 2 with the 70 disciples to labor in the larger cities of Perea. This original group of 12 women had recently trained a larger corps of 50 women in the work of home visitation and in the art of ministering to the sick and the afflicted. When Jesus made his triumphant entry into Jerusalem, riding on a donkey, the 12 women of the original women's corps, accompanied by many of their associates, joined this procession as it moved joyously toward the city as a cheering crowd shouted hosannas and laid down palm leaves as we would a red carpet today. On the Tuesday morning before the crucifixion, Jesus met the apostles, the women's corps, and some 24 other prominent disciples at the home of Simon. At this meeting he said farewell to Lazarus and said goodbye to the aged Simon, and gave his parting advice to the women's corps, as he never again formally addressed them. Many times Jesus told his apostles that he would die and be raised on the third day. The women disciples were present at these discourses, but when Jesus was arrested, most of the disciples, all men, lost faith. All of them scattered, with the exception of Peter and John, and most of the women's corps. None of the apostles went to the tomb after Jesus was buried, and when they were told by the women that Jesus had been resurrected, they did not believe it. However, the women disciples were different. On this night of Jesus' arrest, they followed Jesus all the way to Jerusalem and remained close by during his trial and execution, and not one of them denied or betrayed him. In the book of Mark, in the Bible, we read that during the crucifixion, quote, some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and Salome, mother of the Apostle John. In Galilee, these women had followed him, and many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there, unquote. And in Luke, quote, when all the people had gathered to witness the sight, saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Jesus' mother Mary, his sister Ruth, and a group of earnest women believers, including Jesus' Aunt Mary, who was the wife of Clopas, and Rebecca, one time of Sepphoris, were there too. Notice that these women were different from the general crowds that followed Jesus. They were singled out by the gospel writers as a specific group of followers of Jesus. And after Jesus' burial, and after the Sabbath celebrations, it was a group of women who went to the graveside. They didn't think the men had done a good job of preparing the body of Jesus, so they went to do it right. They found the tomb open and empty. They were the ones who first discovered that Jesus had been resurrected. These women were the first to see and speak with him, the first to whom Jesus appeared. When he addressed them with the familiar voice saying, Mary, they knew it was the Master, and they immediately believed. They rushed to tell the apostles, but of course the men did not believe him. After the resurrection, Jesus made 19 appearances to well over 1,000 people, a few individually, many times to groups. The largest group was over 1,000 people. We know that Mary Magdalene witnessed at least 5 of these appearances. On the day of Pentecost, from the book of Acts, we read, "Then the apostles returned to Jerusalem from the hill called the Mount of Olives, a Sabbath day's walk from the city. When they arrived, they went upstairs to the room where they were staying. This was the same room where the Last Supper was held. They all joined together constantly in prayer, along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. As they all sat there praying, the Spirit of truth was poured out upon all 120 men and women equally. This was the Spirit coming upon them in power and glory as Jesus had promised. And it came equally and at the same time to all women and men all over the world. The women received this Spirit and shared in the blessings equally with the men. No longer was man to monopolize the ministry of religious service. The Pharisee might go on thanking God he was not born a woman, but among the followers of Jesus, woman has been forever set free from all religious discrimination. And this liberation of women, giving them due recognition, was practiced by the apostles immediately after the Master's departure. But unfortunately, people fell back into their old customs in subsequent generations. Throughout the early days of the Christian church, women teachers and ministers were called deaconesses and were accorded general recognition. But Paul, despite the fact that he agreed with all this in theory, never really incorporated it into his own attitude and personally found it difficult to carry out in practice. Paul taught that a man should not touch a woman, but Jesus taught that marriage and the resulting family life was the foundation of civilization. Before the teachings of Jesus, which culminated in Pentecost, woman had little or no spiritual standing in the tenets of the older religions. But after Pentecost, in the brotherhood of the kingdom, woman stood before God equally with man. The Spirit of truth was poured out upon all mankind, women and men, as the personal gift of the Master to every one of his mortal children. Pentecost obliterated all religious discrimination founded in racial distinction, cultural differences, social caste, or gender prejudice. No wonder the believers in the new religion would cry out, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." So let me tell you about a couple of the women's spiritual leaders from the women's corps. Simon Peter's wife, Perpetua, was a member of the women's corps. She was a very able woman, and after Pentecost, when Peter was driven out of Jerusalem, she accompanied him on all his journeys to the churches, as well as on his missionary trips. And the day her illustrious husband Peter was crucified in Rome, she was fed to the wild beasts in the arena. The Apostle Philip's wife, who was an efficient member of the later Women's Corps, was actively associated with her husband in his evangelistic work after they fled from the Jerusalem persecutions. She was a fearless woman who stood at the foot of Philip's cross, encouraging him to proclaim the glad tidings even to his murderers. And when his strength failed, she began preaching of salvation by faith in Jesus and was silenced only when she was stoned to death. Their eldest daughter, Leah, continued their work, later on becoming the renowned prophetess of Hierapolis. These two women, and many others, stood up for their beliefs, faced death fearlessly, and died for their faith. Many others carried their faith to all the world and taught the love and truth of Jesus to their children, families, and friends. There have been, and today are, many great women spiritual leaders, and you see pictures of some of them here. I come from a Christian background. I call myself Jesusonian, so I know these events well. But I know of a certainty that there are women spiritual leaders of all faiths with the same fearless conviction and dedication to their beliefs as Perpetua, Philip's wife, and all the women's corps. In the religion of Jesus, not necessarily the religion about Jesus, but in the religion of Jesus, we see that women are most certainly considered equal to men and respected, valued, and employed as spiritual leaders in bringing the gospel of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of mankind to all people of this world. In the life and teachings, the words and deeds of Jesus, we see that he valued and respected women as they had not been valued and respected before. Not superior to men, but absolutely as equals in eligibility for salvation, in teaching and preaching their religious faith in the kingdom of heaven, and partners in the unselfish service in the kingdoms of men. I believe that equality begins with the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you, or what we call Jesus' platinum rule: do unto others as you would have God do unto you. Many men can testify that their wives are the spiritual fulcrum of the family, and women are invaluable teachers not only in their home, but also in public ministry. Because of their intuitive awareness of the emotional needs of their children, women have a natural ability to perceive spiritual needs of others. By not actively involving women in the ministry, religious organizations lose the wealth of spiritual potential that lies within them. When any religious organization fails to offer opportunities for women in their congregations to demonstrate their talents and gifts, they are missing out on these valuable assets that add balance and completeness to their organization. Such an association can lose their spiritual balance, often seeing religion as more intellectual and dogmatic than loving and uplifting. When opportunity does present itself, or a need is perceived, women should eagerly step up to teach, lead, or serve. Recognize equality when it presents itself, and take full advantage of it. Opportunities may knock, but we have to open the door and walk through it. Don't always wait for opportunities to be given to you. If necessary, create your own opportunities to serve. Find a need or a person that needs served, and fulfill your spiritual destiny and purpose. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." And now we see that when Jesus said, "You are the light of the world," he meant both women and men. A city set upon a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and be led to glorify our Father who is in heaven. Women's light should not be hidden under a bushel, but raised up so that it brings light to the whole world. Both women and men of faith should be the light, but they should also be the candlestick, raising up others. Recognizing spiritual equality does not rest solely upon men. Women too must realize and accept their status and standing before God. They must endeavor to become spiritual thinkers and women of spiritual action. In society, women must stand against the demeaning portrayal of women in our media, movies, and video games. Don't allow men, women, corporations, Hollywood, or the internet to use you for their financial gain and claim it's all in the name of equality and empowering women. One of our goals of the 21st century society should be, as Jesus taught, the full spiritual equality of women and men. there must be a complete dissolution of the backward and ancient ideas about women in all faiths, cultures, and nations. If modern-day religion hopes to be the light shining on the hill, then both its men and its women must become modern-day prophets, the living revelation of the love, the truth, the beauty, and the goodness of God. True equality and true partnership of men and women will reign supreme on our world once peace and love and the equality of sonship with God and the brotherhood of mankind destroys the fears that creates feelings of superiority or inferiority. Feelings that for me as a man may be seen on the one hand as selfish, but on the other hand may be generated by my love for family and the need to provide for and protect the women and children I value and love. When physical and emotional abuse or economic inequality is observed, show up, stand up, and speak up. But do this in a loving and courteous manner that Jesus demonstrated when dealing with the man abusing his wife, or with the righteous indignation when he cleared the temple of the money changers. And do this not just for women, but for the sake of all mankind. Recognizing the spiritual equality of women is important to women, obviously, but it's important for the sake of all mankind. Children don't always follow our examples, but they are permanently impressed by the loyalties of their parents and the adults around them. How we treat each other and our loyalty to our beliefs and our families are important for our children to learn to value themselves and each other. When we adults value each other, perhaps our children will learn to value themselves and each other and stop the senseless scourge of teenage suicide, drugs, and violence. Children need to be raised in an environment where they can develop a sense of respect for both men and women and become future teachers and leaders and ambassadors of the kingdom by observing how we honor God, whom they cannot see, and honor the fathers and mothers, the men and women who they can see. And only when we recognize the spiritual equality of everyone else, when we realize that all men and women are sons of God, will we learn to love one another as Jesus loves us. The Urantia book tells us that which the world needs most to know is men are the sons of God, and the world needs to see Jesus living again on earth in the experience of spirit-born mortals who effectively reveal the Master to all men and women. Every so often, there has to be an agitation of religious and spiritual thinking in order to shake things up and advance civilization for a new generation. And whether the attempt at advancement is well received or rejected, it must be done. I believe that the Urantia book is the agitation needed at this time to move us forward. The Urantia book is the new revelation of Jesus and the gospel of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of mankind that results from our sonship with God. Read it and judge for yourself. I believe that once we lead all women to know and have absolute security in their spiritual equality before God and their eternal destiny and purpose, the assurance that they are loved individually by the infinite and perfect Creator, Father of all things, but they, along with all mortal men, are truly sons of the living God, then they will be empowered with the wisdom, courage, and confidence to become the spiritual leaders and teachers of their families, and perhaps teachers and leaders of the religious organization of their choice. Then they can unashamedly and with confidence take their rightful place in partnership with God and men as ambassadors of the kingdom of heaven. And when men realize the spiritual equality of women, they will learn to value women as leaders and partners in all the various service opportunities available to us. Because in the brotherhood of Jesus, there is no place for sectarian rivalry, group bitterness, nor assertions of moral superiority or spiritual infallibility. And this is true among women, men, races, nations, and cultures who choose to follow Jesus. It requires time for men and women to effect radical and eccentric changes in our basic and age-old concepts of social conduct, philosophic attitudes, and religious convictions. Remember that Jesus will stop at nothing to restore self-respect to those who have lost it and who really desire to regain it. The differences of nature, reaction, viewpoint, and thinking between men and women, rather than causing concern, should be regarded as highly beneficial to mankind as a whole. Such diversity greatly multiplies versatility, potential, and possibilities. Men and women need each other in their material, intellectual, and spiritual careers. Always will men and women continue to intrigue, stimulate, encourage, and sometimes confuse and perplex each other, but always will they be mutually dependent upon loving cooperation and assist each other in the solution of life's problems and difficulties. And how many among us have seen pictures like this of an elderly couple holding hands and wish we had that kind of love? In the material world, there will always be wealthy women and impoverished women. There will always be wealthy men and impoverished men. This is true for the intellectual realm as well. But in the spiritual world, the eternal life after death world, whether you have the faith of Moses or a mustard seed, we are all equal before God. Our spiritual equality with each other is determined only by our own level of spiritual maturity. Material equality is temporary and short-lived, and when it does exist, it ends with death. Spiritual equality is permanent and eternal. Our spiritual capacity and maturity continues to grow forever and never ends. We can fight for and fight about material equality without any hope of resolution. Spiritual equality is a gift from God, mandated by God, and is the one thing, the only thing, we have in common that we can share equally. It is the one thing that can unify all mankind. This world is in a time of transition from the days of fear-based religions to the enlightened times of the personal religion of love. These are the teenage years of civilization, when we are still the child of the past, but not yet the adult of the future. Women of today are in transition too. Some live in squalor, treated not much better than cattle. Others live in penthouse apartments with high-powered jobs, serving even as leaders of powerful nations. Most live somewhere in between. In more modern cultures, women are undergoing a crucial test of their long world existence. Woman, during the past 100 years or so, is finally winning recognition, dignity, independence, equality, and education. But there is much more to be done. The mechanical age has made woman power equal to manpower. The internet, for all of its evils, has unlocked all human knowledge to women. Technology has opened many doors to unheard of opportunities for women. How will women handle all this sudden and unprecedented power and knowledge? In cultures where might makes right, man lords it over woman. As justice, peace, and fairness prevail, she gradually emerges from slavery and obscurity. Today, in many militaristic, atheistic, economically and politically repressive countries, the fight for women's rights and freedoms is only beginning. The status of women there is not much better than it was 5,000 years ago. So let us pray for, support, and encourage our sisters in those cultures. Spiritual equality exists for all women of this world. social equality sometimes not so much. Women who are blessed with larger degrees of freedom, equality, and material wealth should make it their priority to help lift our sisters from poverty and discrimination. To whom much is given, much is expected. Share your blessings and change the world, not just for the women of today, but for the future of all mankind. Will our religious leaders of all faiths recognize the potential and rightful place of women as teachers and leaders, as partners in their ministry to the world? Will men demand respect and administrative equality for their female spiritual and mortal partners? Will women use their spiritual freedom and leadership to rebuild the foundation of civilization by creating strong, healthy families? And now that you have been set spiritually free, what will you do with this freedom? What will you do as ambassadors of the heavenly kingdom to bring the gospel of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of mankind to all the people of this world, including our sisters still living in repression? What will you do to bring the people of this world closer to God and foster lasting peace on earth and goodwill to all mankind? I hope that now you see that in the mind of God and in the religion of Jesus, women are absolutely spiritually equal to men, and that all of you, all of us, are loved and valued personally and individually by our Heavenly Father, just as if we were the only child of His creation. Let us dedicate our lives to proving that love is the greatest power in the universe, that love will overcome evil, and that the gospel of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man shall not fail. One planet, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all of God's children, without regard to color, gender, or anything other than our willingness to do God's will and our desire to love and be loved. Thank you.